This is episode 4 with Maestro Tigran Arakelyan. Hi, my name is Leon Gabrielian, and this is the Thriving Life Club, the podcast for those who want to thrive in every area of life. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the club. Let's begin. How do you like this metaphor? That life is like a symphony. It also has a beginning and it has an end. Every single day is like a musical note, an isolated and independent sound interrupting the silence of your entire life. Combined into weeks, months, and years, these individual and seemingly unrelated sounds form together a melody, a theme, a direction, a symphony, a masterpiece or a disaster, a lifetime of persevering and thriving, or a lifetime of getting by and surviving. A modern full-scale symphony orchestra consists of approximately 100 permanent musicians. Every single musician in that orchestra plays a musical instrument. However, just because all 100 of those musicians have a musical instrument and can play on it doesn't mean they can produce music. In fact, if they all start playing by just following the sheet music, they will literally create musical chaos. In today's episode, we have the pleasure of visiting with Maestro Tigran Arakelyan, an amazing conductor and a great human being. Maestro Arakelyan is the music director of Bainbridge Island Youth Orchestras, the Federal Way Youth Symphony Orchestra, and several others. He played alongside with Sir James Galloway during his induction into the Hollywood Bowl Hall of Fame with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. He is a recipient of numerous awards and has conducted in master classes with a long list of world-class conductors. Maestro Tigran Arakelyan received a doctorate in musical arts degree in conducting from the University of Washington. Outside of conducting, he is the founder and director of the Armenian Orchestral Music Project and the classical program coordinator at Music Works Northwest. He is also the founder and host of Off the Podium Music Podcast, where his guests are renowned musicians and artists. Welcome to the Thriving Life Club podcast, Tigran.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's dive into the beginning of your story. Share a little bit about your journey.
A little bit about my journey. Well, I started out playing music at 9 years old back in former Soviet Armenia. Actually, it wasn't Soviet Armenia. I was born in Soviet Armenia, but I started music in the mid-90s and in Armenia. And one of the reasons I started music actually was because I had some serious case of bronchitis, and I don't even know if it was bronchitis. They said it was that I really had a tough time. I would spend months and months in children's hospitals, and so my parents took me to different places to get treatment. And when we were finally back in Armenia, my parents still kept trying different things, and someone recommended playing a musical instrument. And so my parents liked the flute. They picked the flute for me, and it kind of went from there, and I started the flute. And I like to say it sort of saved my life, although I must say that many other treatments throughout that process helped, obviously, but it seemed like the last one was the flute. So it was the big thing that saved my life, I would say, or got me in a better health in a way. And then, my family moved to the States, and I continued playing music and kept playing flute. I decided to do conducting a little bit later than some conductors, because I think there's a lot of musicians out there, people who are inspired by conductors. They want to be a conductor when they're very young, and they even, test themselves by conducting, YouTube orchestras or something, just conducting and waving their arms. I didn't really care for conducting. I started conducting when I was 22. It was because I just wanted a new way to express myself and collaborate with people and find new approach to music. And I felt that, adding a new musical perspective would help me in achieving that. So conducting was that, I would say.
What did you learn from your experience as a conductor? I know you conduct several orchestras now. What did you learn from your experience thus far?
What I learned, it's really interesting, the learning process. You learn something from every organization you work with, every group. But the thing about conducting, and it's probably the same for coaches coaching various different groups, whether it's a professional or an amateur or a youth basketball team or a soccer team. Same thing with conducting. It really depends on the group that you work with. But it's interesting because when you work with youth orchestras, it's really a educational kind of a component. And youth orchestras, for those who don't know, these are not, public high school or middle school orchestras where you work with the same group every day. These are orchestras that are, kids or parents who want their kids to pursue more in music. They want they want the kids to be in orchestras that are outside of their school, so it's more of a challenging experience for them. So they tackle a lot more repertoire. They play with kids who are not part of their same school but are very talented, and they want to come together and have a new musical experience. We play, I almost treat it like a professional orchestra. We do commissions, so we ask new composers to write pieces for us. We have festivals. We have various different things that are happening. So it's almost like a youth orchestra, but they get a sense of what a professional world would look like. So it's different working with them because there's still an educational component. Everything you do, you're trying to educate the kids. You're trying to inspire the kids. Learning wise, for me, it's learning how to approach the group that I work with, learning how to inspire the group that I work with, and with youth orchestras, which is my passion. Although I work with a variety of other orchestras, I love working with the youth, and I think that they're very important for the future of classical music. And I just want to instill in them the passion, the love for classical music, and I hope many of them don't even become classical musicians because it is a tough world. But I want them to have the passion, the love, the care for classical music. So when they end up doing different careers, you've had a classical background, but you're still interested in classical music. I want people like you to be in the world. So even if they're not part of the classical music professionally, I want them to still be interested in it and support people who are part of that world, because it is very important, but it is very tough. So I want many people out in the world who are going to be inspiring others through classical music, or at least supporting classical music, whether it's financially or just by attending concerts. Because another thing is, there's so many concerts around Seattle. I live in Seattle, but also around LA. There are free concerts of new contemporary classical music, or if you want to listen to the classics and Beethoven, etc. There's a lot of that happening as well. But people are not going out and seeking those opportunities in big numbers. And I go to these concerts and I see low attendance, and I'm surprised because the concert is actually free or with minimal charge. And it's because something is lacking in our educational system. So I want to educate the future generation of youth and instill in them the passion. That's very important. I want them to not always think of things technically, because that's one thing I think we're doing wrong in classical music, is approaching it very technically. Everything is very technical. We have to do this so perfectly. No, it's about the passion, the energy, the love. It's so much more than just playing all the right notes, so I want them to have that experience, to feel that experience through music, and later support it. That's the goal. And of course, learning is different. And with adult amateur orchestras, which is another thing that's great in the US, is now it's kind of happening around the world, is the fact that there's so many amateur community orchestras, people who come from different backgrounds, different careers, and they played violin 20, 30 years ago, and they've kind of kept up with it a little bit, or some of them maybe haven't even kept up with it, but now they have more time. Maybe they have their own business, and they have some extra time, that maybe the kids have graduated high school and they've gone to college, so they have a little bit more time. They come together, they play music, which is something great. And some of these musicians are actually really high level. And sometimes there are amateur orchestras that are from different, of course, people who are maybe tried a professional career in music. It didn't happen. Now they're doing something else, and they still want to play, so they play. So community orchestras have a completely different approach. The way you approach them and the things you learn from that experience is completely different, because you're working with adults who come with a lot of baggage, sometimes with their own problems in life. So, it kind of comes through during our collaborations together. So it's all kinds of things. The one thing that I would say, and I always say this, is my approach to people. I don't approach them and when talking to them about music or what I do, because there are people who are like, oh, you conduct, is that a train, or you're a conductor for a train or an orchestra? People don't even know what a conductor is sometimes. So I try to approach them with no preconceived ideas of what they know about classical music. I want to, from the very start, in my relationship with people that I have never connected with, I want from my very first connection to give them something about what I do for them to be inspired by it and maybe go out and seek. I meet them at the ferry. I take the ferry every week because one of my orchestras is on an island, and I take the ferry every week, and I'm actually going to do that in a couple of hours here. I meet someone, I want to give them some kind of interest in what I do. So when we end our conversation, you know, they could get on their phone and say, you know what, I'm going to check this out. You know, that person said this composer, you know, I've never heard of this composer, or that person said something interesting about music, so I'm going to check it out and research or find it on YouTube and listen to something. So leave them with something that they will be inspired by to go on and find it, because I just find it more and more that classical music is getting further and further away from regular people's lives. So everything I do, I feel like every part that I live and I meet people and I talk to people, I want to make sure that they know about what I'm doing or what some people in the world are doing. So, you know, they could somehow support it, whether it's a click on a YouTube video that, you know, doesn't get too many hits, views, or just something to leave them with something passionate, something exciting for them to go out and seek.
Absolutely. How do you motivate your orchestra?
Motivation is really tough. And one of the things that comes with that is the product that you give them, and the product is the music. And so when picking music for some of my youth orchestras, or whatever orchestra it might be, whether it's a youth orchestra or not, is the repertoire, the music. So one thing I try to do with them is give them a piece that will challenge them. I kind of have categories. One piece that will challenge them. Maybe they won't like it, but I want it to be a challenging experience for them, because the only way we grow, no matter what you do, is challenging. I mean, if you do 3 push-ups a day and you're not challenging yourself to get to that 4th push-up, or whatever it might be, or whatever in life that you're doing, if you're not challenging yourself, then you're not growing. So it's very important to constantly try to challenge yourself. So that's one thing I try to do with my orchestras, any orchestra I work with. Give them a piece that will challenge them, that will take them to the next level. Another piece that I always pick is a piece they will really enjoy. Maybe a piece that they've played before, maybe a piece that they've heard on TV, like a soundtrack of a movie or something that they will connect with, or most of them will connect with. You will never get 100% connection with the orchestra. I mean, it rarely happens. You know, I've studied with many conductors, and they're like, oh, never try to please everyone in the orchestra, because you're never going to try to do it. But the best way to do it is through diversity of the things that you provide for them, because that way you'll get some of the different players. So the next piece, first one is challenging piece. Second one is a fun piece, something they will enjoy. And the third piece that will definitely be an exciting piece for the audience, because in reality, no matter what we do in our rehearsal space, which is most of the time we practice, is to inspire and excite the audiences. So I have to pick a piece that I know most of the audience, again, not all of the audience, but most of the audience will enjoy. Something that's a classic, something that's a fun piece, again, maybe something that's a movie soundtrack, or something that is relevant for the modern day audiences. So I try to work with those ideas and try to both challenge the orchestra, excite them, and make sure they're having a fun experience, and also make sure that when we do play for our audiences, they come out of that experience thinking, you know, that piece, the first one they played, it was something that, you know, I've never heard, and whatever, it was okay. But the piece that we came for was fun. So I want them to leave with a positive experience. So those are the ideas I work with when I think about this.
What gets you going? What makes you get up every morning?
Knowing that there's more things to be done for music. Because, again, as I said, through, you know, conversations, meeting people, or music in general, I feel like there's still a lot more to be done. So what gets me excited, what gets me going, is the new projects. You know, we have actually, I'll tell you something that gets me excited, is the fact that one of my youth orchestras were collaborating with the youth choir. So we have commissioned a new piece for choir, a youth choir and a youth orchestra, and it's being written by a young composer here from the state of Washington, and a living composer, so someone who's not actually dead. That project excites me. We have another festival coming up, months from now, but that's another thing that excites me, because we're gonna have a lot of, we're gonna invite clinicians who are gonna come in and work with our youth and work with our program, and It excites me because of the projects are coming up, and I'll say something with my community orchestra that I work with in Washington. We have various things happening, but one thing that comes to mind is inviting a former member of the community to come back to town. She went on to college, she's graduated, she's making a living as a professional musician, but she's coming back to her hometown to play with the orchestra. So it's exciting. That rarely happens. So it's nice to get her back to town and play with the orchestra, with the community orchestra. So projects that are new and constantly growing. That's what excites me.
And what keeps you productive? I know that you have a very successful podcast of your own. It's called Off the Podium.
Yeah.
How do you keep producing and being passionate, staying passionate?
It's things that bother me in music first, things that frustrate me in the world of classical music, and I feel like not many people talk about it. I wish there were more people talking about some of the things that frustrate me. There are people, but I wish there were more of them, because again, we can't just stay static and be okay with whatever is happening. You know, if there's things that bother you in your field, the best way to do it is to challenge those ideas and try to change them. And it's tough. I mean, it's a tough thing. But the reason why I started that podcast initially was because I wanted to have a platform where I could talk about things that frustrate me. And then I realized that the best way to do these things is to have other people who are in the field, invite them and talk to them. You know, it's similar to what you're doing. So it's usually about them and about what they're doing. But also I try to throw in moments where I talk about things that are recent or things that are happening in the world of music that are frustrating to me. So I try to kind of blend it in and talk about different things. And I still do the part where I talk about the things that bother me specifically, but I try to make it both about them, but about the world of music. And it's tough. Again, the part that's tough is the fact that the world of classical music is very, very small. There are many, many people around the world who do this, who are part of this field, but it's still small. People know each other. Like all my guests are somehow connected to each other. It's really interesting because one of them is from New Zealand. I have people from the UK, Australia, the US, Canada, all over the place, but somehow they're still connected. It's that small. It's a small world, so people try not to offend anyone, but the best way to get to the next level and not lose what we already have is to make sure that we're challenging each other. It doesn't have to be negative challenge, but we have to challenge. If you see something is not going right, we have to say that. Maybe not in a negative way, or not in the way where we're putting each other down, but at least in a positive way where we're saying, you know, that shouldn't have happened. You're not doing it. That's not going to be useful for the future generation of young musicians. That's not useful for our audiences. That doesn't work for our audiences. Things that are problematic, we have to address them and tackle them and make sure that they don't repeat. But we're afraid to say those things because we're afraid to lose gigs. We're afraid to lose, fans in the world of classical music, because the classical audiences are actually not very used to the more aggressive approach to tackling these problems. So it's a little bit tough. It's a little bit tough getting through, but there are a few classical music podcasts, but this one, I think that the reason why it's unique is because it is tackling problems that most of the other ones I don't think tackle to a certain extent. And all of them are good for various reasons.
Yeah, the problems that everyone is thinking about and not too many people are willing to talk about.
Yeah.
What are the things that help you thrive through that process of pushing it forward and tackling those frustrations that you have?
It's really the two things. The future of classical musician, well, both of them are connected, but the future of classical music, the future of this field and it being around and successful, not being like a museum item, but being very successful and being very important for the public in general, that the future of that, and also the future of young musicians, people who want to make a career in the world of classical music, but unfortunately there aren't too many opportunities. We could find artificial opportunities. There are people who create opportunities for themselves. They find these great small festivals, or they find new groups that they play with, but those are not, let's be honest, these are not opportunities where you actually make a living. I'm talking about people who graduate college, who graduate in the world of music and have no opportunities. And I know that's been the case for hundreds of years, but or 100 years at least for a long time. But why don't we realize that the things that we've tried so far in the world of classical musicians, as artists, as classical musicians, the things that we've tried have not been working. Obviously, they haven't been working because we haven't been growing the audiences. I think we talked about this one time when we were together and hanging out and talking about things. I always have a great time talking to you. Is the fact that, for example, let's take a city like New York. New York has New York Philharmonic, and there are some other smaller groups. But a big city like New York Philharmonic at this point, it's been around for like 100 years or so. It should have two major orchestras, not just one. And we're happy and content with the fact that New York Philharmonic is selling out some concerts. That's ridiculous. That's not enough, because the number of musicians, the number of young people getting into the arts has grown. Our population has grown. I think within the, I don't know the exact numbers, but it must be at least 20 to 30 million within the past 15 years that the US population has grown. So the population is growing. The number of young musicians aspiring to be in the field of music is growing, yet the opportunities for them to find a job is decreasing. So obviously we're doing something wrong. The thing that frustrates me is the fact that we're so content with it. And we find ridiculous articles. You'll find articles about classical music. There's always a way. It'll say there's always a way to make a living in the world of classical music, and they'll find these ridiculous things that somehow they've made a living. Okay, sure, you found a way to do those things, but we're talking about the majority of the people who are having a tough time getting into the orchestras, which is ever decreasing. Orchestras are folding. You're in the LA area. Santa Barbara Chamber Orchestra just folded. And orchestras are folding left and right, but we're so content with these things. I just want to be in the world. I want to find a way myself, and I know others are trying to as well. I'm not the only one, obviously, who is trying different approaches to these problems. Some people find it through blogs, some people find it through podcasts and other things that will challenge the current situation, but it's not enough people and it's not moving. The thing that also frustrates me is the fact that classical musicians, or people in general, are inspired by visionary people who are revolutionary people, right? I mean, most people are inspired. You'll see quotes from famous revolutionary people who are like, no, despite what happened here or there, this person went through and said, you know what, we're going to try this and we're going to get it done. Despite the fact that 100,000 people were against that idea. People are inspired by people like this. But when it comes down to actually being one of those people, when it comes down to actually stepping up and saying, you know what, this has been done for 100 years, let's really change it because it's not working. It's actually making us go backwards. People don't want to take those steps. People don't want to go against the tide, or whatever you want to call it. So I want to create, a place to, again, it comes back down to the youth and doing this for the youth, and want to have passionate youth who will passionately speak about classical music and never disrespect the people who don't know about classical music. We have to, at this point, we have to have a very direct and educational approach to every single human being that talks to you about classical music or even has the slightest interest in what you're doing. One thing that, again, I could go on and on about these things, but one thing that I see sometimes that frustrates me a little bit is that sometimes when we see people who don't know much about classical music, we look down on them. Mm-hmm. We have to look up and try to find the common ground with them because we've taken our field so far back that we have to find new ways to approach these people, and we have to do it. Not pointing fingers at other people who don't know about classical music. We have to. That means we haven't done the things that we should have done throughout these past 100 or 20 or 40 years or whatever it might be. We haven't done the right things for them to enjoy classical music. Look at yourself and find your own faults and maybe fix them and approach people with a new mentality. Don't just point fingers and say these people are stupid or they don't know or they don't like classical music. That means it's their fault or they're not smart enough to like our field. No, if they don't like it, find a way to make them like it. Find a way to excite them about the thing that you're trying to do.
Absolutely. Just like in business as well. If nobody's buying the product, don't blame the market for it and try to change. Be flexible enough to change the product to fit the market, fit the exact needs that the market has, instead of blaming the market for not buying it. What 3 things do you need to thrive during a typical day?
I'm drinking coffee as we speak, so coffee.
Okay.
3 things is, I would say, funny and serious. It's coffee, it's work, that's not passive work, that's active work. And that's something that is going to get me out of my comfort zone and push me to get that thing done, whatever it might be, whether I like it or not, do that. And also just relationship with my wife, with my brother, who I speak to every day practically, and relationships with people that inspire me. Those three things, it covers it: the coffee, the job, and the relationships.
What do you mean by active work?
Active work, it's just like active music, because one thing, I'll bring this as a comparison to music, is that I hear a lot of people say they listen to classical music, but they listen to it when they're doing homework, or they listen to classical music just because, they're doing their dishes and they want to listen to something. So that's passive listening. You have to be actively engaged in that. So when you're listening, I don't know, you're watching the YouTube video. When you're listening maybe actively being in that moment, in that space, because otherwise you're not giving 100% attention to the thing that you're trying to do, because you're multitasking. And that multitasking is such a big thing. It appears to be such a fancy thing to do. You're so great when you're multitasking. It's not always good. Obviously, you're multitasking, it's great, but then at the same time, you're running away from you're not 100% devoted to the thing that you're trying to learn or understand better. So active listening or active approach to the job that you're trying to do, answering emails and stuff, those are, I don't know, depends on the email, but those are not. When I'm talking about active work, is work that is challenging me, that is making me think about what I'm trying to accomplish. It's like a project that I'm working on. I'm trying to put it together, see if this is going to work with this, or if this repertoire is going to work with this, if being in that space is really going to work for these organizations, or just things that are challenging me to think in different ways and addressing and solving the problem. Because when you're doing like a math problem, when you're working on a math problem, I don't think you could be doing another thing and chatting with your friend on Facebook and doing that math problem actively. Or even if you are, it's like you dedicate like 3 or 5 minutes to that math problem, then you answer, but you're not like doing various things. To really solve something, you really have to dedicate yourself and get it done.
What would you say is your biggest fear moving forward?
The biggest fear is people not understanding that we're facing problems. People who don't care. That's another thing that I don't like. People who don't care. People who say that they don't care. They're not worried about their field. They're not worried about their community. They're not worried about the future generation of youth that are coming up and living in this world. I don't like people like that, and I'm worried about them, and I fear them. Not as a physical threat, but I fear people like that because they're dangerous for the world. Because I want people who actually care. That's what makes the world a beautiful and a thriving place to be, because of people who care. And they sometimes do jobs that are maybe dangerous for them, or they might not be very successful and gain big popularity, but they know and they see the future and they want to do it because it's going to be good for the future generation of musicians or people in general. It doesn't even have to be music. I fear people who don't care about stuff, who don't care about their field or community or anyone. So that's what I fear. I fear people who feel that way, who don't care.
People who are shut down.
Yeah.
What, to your mind, would be the greatest misfortune then?
Is to give people like that an opportunity to lead the major organizations. And again, I feel like I say this, and I'm sure many people who listen to this who are not classical musicians could somehow relate it to their field, but I'll say this: people who are put in positions of leadership, especially in the world of classical music or in your fields, whatever it might be, put in these roles to lead when they actually don't care. That'll be a misfortune, because we do have people like that in the world of classical music. People who are, I'll give you one example. I'll give you the example that I always talk to, and it's been on my mind for a long time. It's the music directors. People who come to major cities in the US especially and hold major orchestra director positions, and they call it full-time jobs, and they get paid very well, like $600,000 a year. And guess how much time they spend? They spend like 15 weeks out of the year for a $600,000 job. And then they end up going and conducting a different orchestra. We have to somehow change the system and change their approach. If they want to show up for 15 weeks, maybe we should just pay them 15 weeks and have the rest of the money that we pay to invest in something else, music education, in other conductors that are actually going to show up. I hope this changes, because it's not good for the field, and it's not going to be great if we continue employing people who are not 100% devoted or give themselves fully to the organizations that lead our cities, because major symphony orchestras are the number one cultural organizations in most cities. Most cities, when you have a major symphony, that's like the number one cultural resource as far as like finances and the number of people they employ and everything. So it's hiring people who care for the community that organization serves, and we don't have too many of those people.
Couldn't agree with you more. What is your life philosophy towards life and work? Is there overarching philosophy that you have or a motto that you go by?
I love passionate people, so just being passionate about the things that you do and caring for the things that you do. Sometimes we have conductors, for example, that are like, okay, well, I'll take this amateur orchestra job, this community orchestra job, because eventually I want to be the conductor of the greatest orchestra. No, when you're in that moment, when you're conducting that orchestra, you give 100% and you don't think about anything else other than how to make that organization the best that it could be. I know it can't be the greatest orchestra maybe because it is an amateur or community musicians, but you're going to have to make that experience both the best that you can for the people that play in the orchestra and the best possible experience for the audiences that are going to attend the concerts. These are the people who create a bad environment for classical music, is people who go and just do their job just 50%. You're like, okay, well, I'm going to do this because I'm off. I will be getting that big job 5 years from now. So I'm just going to do this just to put it on my resume. For me, it's passion, giving 100% to the organization I work with and work hard for them and for the community it serves, and love and care. Yeah.
Beautiful. What is your definition of a thriving life?
Thriving life, having people that are beautiful people that surround you, creating that space in your life for the people that you care and love for. For me, it's my wife, my brother, my family, and good friends that I meet sometimes because I grew up in LA. So I have a lot of good friends that live in LA. So I try to have the time for them whenever I'm in town, when some of them visit me up in Seattle, and I have friends here. So having that thriving life is having people who you care for, you love, be part of your life, and giving them that time, because it is tough. You know, sometimes I find myself, and my wife, when she listens to it, she'll understand. Sometimes I'm in work mode a lot, and no matter where we are, you know, we took like a 3-day little vacation up to Victoria, Canada, to that part of the world, and I was still constantly checking, setting up times for my podcasts and talking about various things that I'm doing with my orchestras constantly on email and Skype and all this stuff. So sometimes it's important to just put that stuff aside and make sure you dedicate time to the people that you love and care for 100%, not 50%, not multitasking with them, sitting there with them at the beach or whatever it might be, but you're on your phone and doing work and giving them your time. That's very important. And also the second part for thriving life, I have a lot of amazing organizations that I work with, and I want to take them to the next level. So just challenging myself and finding ways to take that organization to the next level, but also challenging that organization and trying to bring them to the level I want to see them at. So those things, I would say.
What's the biggest mistake that you ever made?
The biggest mistake for me, it's always in the consistency. I don't know if I could find one particular one, but places and organizations I have not been consistent with. I would say that I work hard at being consistent and challenging the groups and giving 100% to the groups. But as a general answer, I would say I regret the places, and whether it's relationships or work-related things that I have not been consistent with.
I know that you're very passionate about sports, specifically about tennis and mixed martial arts.
Two different sports, but I love both those sports, yeah.
So how do you combine? Like you conductor, you conduct music orchestra, and then you are also passionate about sports, which are at times violent, and tennis is not that violent, but mixed martial arts gets really violent.
You know, it's funny you said that, and I rarely talk about my love for mixed martial arts to musicians, because all of them have the same answer for me, is the fact that it's a violent sport. How does someone who conducts classical music like a violent sport? Well, you know, the thing is that I like the sport because I like people. I respect all athletes, I'll say this. No matter what sport, even if I don't like the sport or I don't watch the sport, because to be an athlete and to be a musician takes a lot of dedication, time, energy, anything we do to do it well, you need all those things. So athletes, I like it, and it's great because they inspire me in that way. As far as violence, classical music, there are many, many orchestras that, or many, many symphonies or pieces, orchestral or non-orchestral pieces that depict violence. The first one that comes to mind is Shostakovich's Leningrad Symphony. So there are many, many pieces that have been written with violence in mind, or with peace in mind, or with showing the violence that is happening around the world. So, just because it's not direct and it's something that you can't see with your eyes, that doesn't mean it's not there. It's just, it's comes through the notes. And that's another thing that I try to do, is show people that classical music is not just, a beautiful little string quartet or a symphony composed by Mozart or Haydn. There are many, many composers who have composed some insane, crazy, very violent sounding music that most people don't know about, because we're so programmed by today's media and just classical radio stations, etc., to listen to the soft stuff that classical music has. The great thing about classical music is the fact that it not only has the beautiful melodies that you think about the person that you love the most, your first love, or your wife, or your children, or whatever it might be, but also pieces that really show the violence, the hatred that the world has or had. That's another mission and goal of mine, is to show that classical music is not just the soft, beautiful melodies, but it's also the violent, rhythmic, and aggressive sounds of the orchestra, whether it's from the brass or the strings or all of them combined together. It's everything. And so I hope listeners who listen to this will go out and find some things. The first thing again that comes to mind, listen to some Shostakovich symphony, listen to his Seventh Symphony, and tell me how you feel. Tell me if it's nice, and you could do your homework and listen to that, because I highly doubt it.
So what are some of the top misconceptions that people have towards classical music?
That's the top one, I think. That's the top one. I think a big misconception, and again, I'll say that we as classical musicians have part of the blame for it, is thinking that classical music is beautiful, and it is, but thinking that it's just that. It's a big variety of sounds and music that classical music has. So that's a big misconception. Another misconception is that maybe that classical musicians are nice and they don't like to party maybe, and that they just play their concerts and then they go home and practice. No, classical musicians love to party, they love to drink and do all the other crazy stuff that most people like to do, except it maybe doesn't come out that way, or you don't experience it, or you don't see it. And also another big misconception, I would say, the third one, is the fact that all the composers that we play today, all the composers that have composed the great music, are the composers that are dead. There are many, many composers who live today and are composing amazing music. There are many, many composers who have lived in the past, or even like 30, 40 years ago, whose music we don't know well, but are great composers. Those are some of them, some of the myths.
What is the top reason someone who's listening to us needs to or must check out classical music? What is one thing they great reason to just check out classical music, and where do they start?
This is a great question. If you haven't listened to classical music in the past recent months or in a year or whatever, the one thing I'll say is that listen to it, because it's not going to be what you've imagined it to be, and listen to composers that you wouldn't think of listening to. I hate to give names, but I'll just throw a few out there that maybe people don't know. I actually interviewed Kronos Quartet. This is a world-renowned quartet. They've done over 800 premieres throughout their career. They're coming close to their 50th anniversary. Type Kronos Quartet, listen to some of what they've done. Just type Kronos Quartet on YouTube. Watch some of the music that they've done, some of the inspiring music, and they're so varied in everything that they've done. Listen to Shostakovich, listen to 20th century music, listen to Bernstein, listen to Shostakovich, listen to Mahler, listen to Bruckner, Stravinsky, Prokofiev, Schoenberg, many others. Avet Terterian, who's an Armenian composer that not many people know about. Listen to his music. Your idea and your understanding of what classical music is will change when you hear some of these composers, because these are not composers that you've probably heard about often. The one that you probably have heard about was Bernstein, American composer who also composed many pieces that are well-known, West Side Story, etc., that people know. So those are some of the connections that you might have with him. But others that you will definitely probably have not heard if you don't often listen to classical music. So the classical music, go out, listen to it, and you'll have a different understanding of what it is. One thing I'll say is that it's an interesting thing, because when I talk to people, it's a quick conversation. I've met them for the first time. I always like to find a piece based on the short conversation we've had to leave them with. So I always try to recommend something. And, the people that I talk to sometimes have never heard classical music. So I'm like, it seems like based on what we talked about, the things that you would like this composer or that composer, you should listen to it. So it's a nice little challenge for me mentally to try to figure out what they might like and recommend something for them. Whether they listen to it or not, it's fun.
One question I have in mind right now: how does conducting an orchestra imitate life, and what can we learn from that experience?
I would say that understanding of the give and take, understanding of what you want from life maybe, but what it gives you. Because in an orchestra, it doesn't matter what orchestra you conduct. You might come in front of the orchestra and expect to hear this or that sound, or you could expect to hear that the orchestra will right away play some crazy fast tempo that you really wanted. But what you're hit with from the orchestra is completely different than what you imagined. So it's really important to understand that everything you expect you're not going to get, but you can work hard and get to that moment. To have high expectations is great in life or whatever you might do, but to not get those expectations or the things that you're striving for right away, that doesn't mean that you give up and not do it. You might be hit with something that you weren't expecting, but it's your job, it's your duty to work hard and try to make the best out of that situation, but also take the orchestra or your life in a direction that will eventually get to that point where the orchestra will play that fast tempo, or your life will have, or your job will have this, will hire some new employees that will work for you because that's what you wanted, because you wanted your business to grow this way or that way. And so just understanding what you're hit with and not panicking and being able to find ways to fix the situation and make it better for both you and the people you serve.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Tigran, for joining us. I really enjoyed our interview today.
Thank you so much. It's great. And I love that you're doing this. The questions are absolutely amazing. And it's great to be on this side because I'm usually on the other side. I've done over 50 or so podcasts, and I'm always the one asking the questions. And it's so weird to be on this side. It's awesome.
And there we have it. Another amazing guest has visited our club. Make sure to subscribe to the Thriving Life Club podcast on your favorite app. Simply go to thriving.lifeclub.com/ and the name of your favorite platform. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube. You get the point. You will find the show notes, the episode freebie, and the resources mentioned during the episode by navigating your browser to thriving.lifeclub.com/ and the number of this episode. For example, for the episode 3, you would go to thriving.lifeclub.com/ 3. For the episode 7, you would go to thriving.lifeclub.com/ 7. We want to make this podcast the #1 podcast on iTunes in its category. When you feel inspired, head over to iTunes and give us a quick review to keep the podcast commercial free and get it discovered by more people like you and families like yours. Rate and review the podcast on iTunes and share it with your friends. Let's inspire more people together. And until the next episode, just remember, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can, live a thriving life.